Hello and welcome to Cinema Spectator, a show where an expert and a casual movie fan watch movies in the cinematic canon. Today's film was Unforgiven, directed by Clint Eastwood, starring Clint Eastwood, Gene Hackman, and Morgan Freeman. My name is Cameron Tuttle, and I'm joined today with Isaac Ransom. Isaac, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm serious. No more happiness in Westerns. Just raw, depressing action. Not even. Just a lot of talking and good cinematography. I'm good. I'm honestly good. Just a lot of stuff in my personal life going on. And honestly, at the end of the day, you got to be like, just can't complain. Life could be way worse. Sometimes that's what you got to say. So just trying to change my perspective a little bit on things and stay positive, you know?
Yeah, no, it's true. And actually, we're kind of recording two episodes almost simultaneously, which is funny. Kind of rare that we do that, but it's good because I think it gives us a little bit more of a truncated view of like the last sort of, 50 years of Westerns. I guess we'll talk about sort of where the Western has come, if it's dead or whatever. I don't think so, but we'll get into it. But I haven't been watching anything, like I said, because we're kind of recording these two almost simultaneously. So just this movie in between, and yeah, hopefully I'm actually looking forward to watching the movie Pig in the upcoming week, which is that new Nicolas Cage movie. I'm excited for it. It looks good. It's gotten good reviews. So yeah, me and Juzo, we're gonna plan to see it. So yeah.
Well,
hopefully.
I know that listener of the show, Tim Smith, really wants to watch that movie with me. He's been trying to get me to go to the theater to see it with him. I haven't even seen Mandy, so I don't know. Like, I guess Nicolas Cage is kind of having a comeback with like art house, like really strange movies, right?
Yeah.
So it will be interesting to see if it's any good. And I don't even know if I can handle like some of the other like small cult classics that he's creating in his older age now. So I haven't watched anything either besides this. And I attempted to get my parents to watch Casablanca again, and they just would not. My dad was like, well, why don't we watch The Great Escape? Because he loves that movie. So I haven't seen it in a long time. I'm sure it's coming. I'm going to watch it again. So I can't stop thinking about the scene with Leonardo DiCaprio in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, though, when I think about that movie, where they planted him in it. Nevertheless, yes, this is Cinema Spectator. You can support us at patreon.com/ECFS Productions. Throw a couple dollars our way, get an exclusive commentary track each month, or even an exclusive episode. I don't know. Cameron and I are starting to think outside the box a little bit. So you will get at least a full-length special piece of content for just the dollar level. You can also have your questions read on air, just like Tim Smith writes in. He asks, if you could have any currently alive director with any actor or actress, who would it be? Cameron.
It's kind of a hard one because I feel like a lot of people have been working together who I would want, like I think I think about like Tarantino and Leo and Brad Pitt, and that's like I want that all day. I don't know, because there's so many. The thing about actor-director relationships is you almost can't tell until it's happened, I think about Heath Ledger and Christopher Nolan, and even actually Harry Styles and Christopher Nolan in Dunkirk.
Yeah.
So sometimes there are things that just surprise you. I think honestly, I want this might be controversial, I guess, but I want a Kevin Spacey, David Fincher comeback. That's actually what I would want. I know it's not going to happen, and unfortunately, he's making movies like in Europe because he's been run out of town. But I think like a in the vein of Seven kind of movie, I think that would be really great.
Yeah, I've never seen Seven, but I've heard of it. So, for me, I don't know a ton of. I feel like I have a small context of who to pick, but I really enjoyed that Twilight guy in Tenet. What's that guy? He's been in a lot of good movies. Robert Pattinson, and I'd love to. Yeah, I want to pair him with more of a fun director because he's kind of been in like horrible, cheesy, like the Twilight series. But then now he's like doing this artistic movie. I'm like, let's kind of move you back in the middle. I mean, he's with Christopher Nolan, but there's like nothing funny in Christopher Nolan movies. So it's all gray. I want to see him do a movie with. I'm blanking on the name, but the guy that did Evil Dead, what's his name? I love him. The Spider-Man trilogy.
Sam Raimi.
Yeah, let's see Robert Pattinson and Sam Raimi do a movie together. I think that would be so wacky, and I think they could both pull it off. Because to see,
maybe like an old school horror, like Sam Raimi horror movie.
Yeah, and
that'd be cool.
That would be cool if they brought vampires in it too. That would even be funnier. Like what if he was a vampire hunter or something like that, and it was like just ridiculous or something like. Yeah, I don't know. I think something fun and enjoyable with some energy around it.
Yeah, I think Pattinson is genuinely just a great actor. He showed his chops a lot in Good Time, which like really sealed the deal for me. So I'm kind of excited for the Batman, but I'm whatever.
Yeah.
We've already had the best Batman that could possibly be. So I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully, I don't know. DC has just been making some weird moves. Although to be fair, like I think I'm not really sure why they're trying to remake Suicide Squad or redo like the Suicide Squad movie with
James Gunn.
James Gunn.
Yeah.
I mean, I assume for like redemption or whatever, but it seems pretty early to do that. But they're kind of all over the place. DC is.
I actually think it's some sort of like indirect sequel or something. Because
it is. It is.
Yeah, it's very strange. I don't have any interest to watch it. What I will say about DC that interests me more than Marvel movies right now is they seem to be desperate for something, so they're taking a little bit more risks, and at least I can appreciate that. Like I want to see them do something even crazier out there. I mean, just the fact that the Zack Snyder cut was released at all, and it's not even good, but the fact that they did something like that shows me I'm like, well, maybe they'll just go so crazy that they make something good. You never know.
That's a really good point. I hadn't put it in those words, but yeah, I think that's entirely possible that they can get something really weird and really outside the box. I mean, I would say Joker is one of those risks. Where it paid off, but for the most part, I mean, it's just been bad.
Yeah, so I think like I don't want to see. Excuse me. I don't want to see anything like Shazam again. Like we don't need a 2004 Marvel movie. I think what they're trying to do with Suicide Squad and being more crazy out there, and then of course talking about Joker and even Batman. I'm sorry, but like Cameron, yeah, the Batman trilogy, the Dark Knight trilogy is epic. I love it. But Batman, everyone loves Batman. Like they're not going to stop making Batman movies.
No, it's true.
So like for them to explore maybe a new side, there's so many great depictions of Batman in the comics that he has like a little bit of an edge, or it almost could go as far as like an Into the Spider-Verse thing where like Spider-Man's been around for so long that there's so many different styles of Spider-Man. You could do the same thing with Batman, all the iconic suits and whatnot. Like we've seen the normal Batman. Let's get like some Batman Beyond, like that's what I'm ready for. Is something something that can pass the torch in a way. So, great question, Tim. Thanks for writing in. Of course, if you're a Patreon, you can write in. We do check our messenger as frequently as we can remember to. So we want questions on air. You can write in even sillier things. It doesn't even have to relate to movies. So
you can ask us if you'd rather fight a duck-sized horse or a horse-sized duck. Which is the one?
Yeah, a lot of people seem to be talking about that right now. So it's funny. I don't want to answer that question. I don't want to fight any ducks or any horses. All right.
Yeah, that's animal cruelty. Okay.
All right, we'll call him PETA. Yeah, if you don't have a few dollars, it's all good though. You can give us a rating on iTunes. Tell friends and family if you enjoy the show. And this is the part where we get into the movie review, Cameron. We're talking about Unforgiven. What year was it released? What are we doing with this?
Yeah, so this was a movie made in 1992. Technically, I guess this is sort of the end cap in Clint Eastwood's Western career. In fact, he actually said while making this movie this was going to be the last movie that he directed and starred in. Not true. He ended up starring in plenty more movies after this, but yeah, so this was sort of his own way of kind of passing along the torch, or even just concluding his own history with the Western. And you see that because he wears the same boots that he wore in his first Western movie. I forget which one it was, but so he has a couple of these callbacks throughout the movie that are designed to either pay homage to his earlier films, or sort of in some ways be this sort of legacy of his own career. But this comes at a time where obviously we're about 30, almost 40 years past the heyday of the westerns, and even the spaghetti western. And so this is at a time where there hasn't been really a great western considered in the canon since probably about 1969. 1971 maybe, if you count The Outlaw Josie Wales. But I think a lot of these sort of westerns in this time period, and what you'll see after this movie is there's actually a bunch of westerns that pop up, or a handful of westerns that pop up around this movie, and in the wake of this movie. Things like Tombstone, and there's a couple other like actual legitimate historical westerns that happen around this time. But really, this was, I think, in a lot of ways, I think of this movie as sort of a final version of the Western saga, of the Western mythos, and it's one that is very grim. It's very brutal. It's very instead of in something like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where you do have ambiguity. You have these characters who are not very good, but who you're rooting for, and but they still sort of kill a lot of people. They still use violence as a tool. In this movie, the violence is very not taken lightly at all. In fact, there's a lot of lead up to the violence, and then when it happens, it's very depressing.
Yeah.
and not very, it's not looked upon as something that's heroic or good, even if one could argue that maybe they're doing the right thing. Who knows? I think that's part of the sort of ambiguity of the movie, but the violence in all is looked at as something that is really devastating for everybody, for the people who commit the violence, and for the people it's committed upon. So this movie takes the I do think takes a more modern sensibility with the idea of the Western. It's one that treats things with more, I guess, more like articulate means. It's one that sort of has a sense that there was a lot of damage and destruction, and people died for no reason in these in this time, and that wasn't good. That wasn't something to be looked back on heroically. So yeah, so that's kind of my main intro. Clint Eastwood, obviously, after the spaghetti westerns that he did with Leone, he actually said that he wasn't going to work with Leone again after The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, and that was particularly because he thought Leone was too slow when he was directing. Eastwood is a very interesting and funny guy because he's actually taken over productions before because the director was taking too long.
Yeah.
And so, I think he did that on Outlaw Josie Wales. He actually just took over the production and fired the director and finished the movie for him because he was basically like, no, we're gonna hurry this up. I want to be home at 5. So,
Yeah.
but through the 70s, obviously he was kind of reeling from the fame of Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, from the fame of being that star. And then in 1971, he actually he directed his first movie, and he played Harry in Dirty Harry, which made him an even greater star. And he became both a Western star and an action star. Sorry, I did say Outlaw Josie Wales was 71. It's not. It's 76. But sorry, Juzo, I got it wrong. So so in the 70s and in the 80s, he became sort of a as he was getting older, I guess he became not just the Western man with no name. He became an action star. He became sort of this really big name in that time. And to be fair, like, he really evolved during the 80s as someone who he was almost like, I don't know. In some ways, he was kind of the poster child for the 80s film movement in a lot of ways. And so then he obviously gets older at this point. I mean, I think right now, he's, let's see. Okay, so in 1992, he would have been 62. So he's in the 90s. He's getting a little bit older. He's starting to do more I guess fatherly figures in some ways, and that's when he starts to pick up his directing as well. So, yeah, I mean he starts to kind of his trajectory as a film star starts to shift a little bit from what we saw in the 60s movies, and I think you can see that, and it's kind of funny because the trajectory of this hero that we follow in Unforgiven is almost the exact opposite of almost any other Western that we've ever seen, right? It's very different. He starts, he can't even shoot a gun or fall off, he falls off his horse, whatever else. And then he turns into basically just the biggest monster in town, and that is a fun thing to watch in some ways, but it's also it's portrayed very darkly. So yeah, I guess do we want to talk a little bit about the story, Isaac?
Yeah, we'll give some background. First of all, I just want to say this movie I think is pretty easy to get through. It's only 2 hours and 11 minutes. It's very pretty, and the pacing is a little slow, but I think most modern viewers could sit through it if they kind of walk in with the expectation around it. The story follows Clint Eastwood, like you were saying, being settled down, and he has like 2 kids, and his wife has passed away, and so he's grumpy, And then this young guy comes up and informs him about the first scene in the film, which is about these 2 cowboys that are in a like whorehouse, and they end up like cutting up one of the women. And so there's been a bounty placed by, the prostitutes on the heads of the cowboys to kill them for revenge because the local town sheriff didn't do enough. He let them loose and said, just pay back the pimp owner of the saloon or whatever with horses. So the prostitutes are mad. They put a bounty on the cowboys' heads, and Clint Eastwood is fallen over with pigs, barely providing for his family. This young guy shows up and says, hey, we got to go hunt down these cowboys. And so him, the young guy, and Morgan Freeman, who's his old partner, go on a journey to go find these guys and kill them. I don't know how much we want to get into spoilers, but Cameron is right when he says like there's almost a comedic element of how old and not like not cool Clint Eastwood is at the beginning of the movie, and he slowly regains his abilities and becomes this straight killer by the end. And the final scene, like the final confrontation, is like it has this grounded heaviness, right? That like when you watch a Clint Eastwood film with him in a Western, you want to see him spinning the gun. You want to see him being awesome, right? And he's none of that in the movie till the end, where the coolness factor, right, which you're talking about, leaves you feeling empty, leaves you feeling like there's not necessarily anything to celebrate in that moment when you've been excited to see him spin a pistol and excited to like, you know, kind of witness his like unleashed form or whatever. But instead of any sort of celebration, it's just not only is it brutal and it's kind of exciting in some ways because you're like, well, I have no idea. Like he sucked the whole movie, and I'm gonna see him go into like Super Saiyan mode or whatever. But like it is indicative to the film's underlying themes about like just how grounded and disgusting and heartless the legends of the West really were, and that's actually a large focus in it, where there's this conversation about a writer trying to depict, these different like gunslingers and assassins and whatnot, and he's writing down like these like big crazy stories, and that's constantly ridiculed by the men who lived through that time and said, no, it wasn't like that. As a matter of fact, the ones that lived were the calm, heartless killers, that could just shoot and kill and like not feel a thing. Basically, any sort of emotion was looked down upon. It's like, so there's a ton of commentary about, sort of the, it's harkening back to the gray area, in like the morality of being a Western gunslinger, and unlike most of the Westerns we've seen so far, instead of leaning into like, well, there's a bad or questionable decisions, but at the end of the day, like these are good men. That's how it like started with the end of Ford's films, right? This movie leans oppositely, where there are like some, honorable attributes of these men, but at the end of the day, they're just vicious, violent, evil people, right? Like it's a swing in the other direction that we haven't seen in Westerns. And that's what makes it feel probably the most modern, is there's like this level of depression around the concept. There isn't a joy around exploring. It's sad when they eventually find these cowboys and shoot at them, right? The interaction and the death of these men who did something bad it makes you feel just as bad for them too. Like they spend a ton of time being like, the bad guys aren't bad, the good guys aren't good, and like no one's good. No one is necessarily a good person at all. And so I think there's a lot of interesting commentary around it, around all of it. I think we could talk about this movie in a lot of different directions, because my initial perspective on watching it was sort of like, okay, that was good, but the more I think about it, the more dissectable the film becomes, especially with Clint Eastwood's arc of, once being a legend that he hated, right? He's like living with a trauma from it, to then trying to get back into that for a small reason of providing for his family. There's little warning signs from him and his friends saying like, this is not who we are anymore, or like your wife wouldn't have liked this. And then like, there's also these other moments of like age and almost like revelation, right? He has these little like low points in his hero's journey that you kind of feel like there's a, something like wakes up inside of him, but then any chance of that hope is, then later crushed or ignited into something different. So there's a lot of I know that's being kind of vague, but I don't really want to spoil all of it, because I think that you should go watch this movie, even though I'm a little unsure about it. I think there's a lot to pull away. Cameron, is there anything else you want to talk about, like the plot, or maybe even just Clint Eastwood's arc, or kind of bounce off what I've been saying?
Yeah, well, I do want to talk a little bit about Little Bill, who is kind of the foil to his archetype of, to the Clint Eastwood character of being, living through that time period, living through that sort of violence, being a big part of the violence, and then coming away from it at the other end, doing something different and being a changed person. And then obviously a lot of the thrust of this movie is sort of trying to get them together. I would say, and you know, like you said, maybe we'll go into spoiler territory later. But the I think Little Bill is a really interesting character to dissect in the same way, because he, in a lot of ways, is supposed to be, when you first meet him, he's also the character who kind of, he's just the sheriff and he's just trying to make peace in the town. And he says to Alice, he's like, haven't you seen enough blood spilled tonight? And, and then, he's a bad carpenter, and you kind of like him at the beginning, and he sort of has this charm, and that all shifts really radically once he starts to beat British Bob, or English Bob.
Yeah.
And
British Bob's a better name, by the way. I think that's a way better name.
British Bob.
Yeah, it's so much more fun.
But I think, he turns from being really kind of a, almost like a hokey, I'm the sheriff kind of person, to being like really scary. And I think that I love that scene. My favorite scene in the movie maybe is the scene in the prison when he's with the writer, and he's talking, and he's kind of going over where English Bob, where he went wrong, and then he gives the writer the gun, and he says, like, shoot me. And there's that really drawn out tense scene that I think is so good. And then he gives English Bob the gun, or he's about to, and and English Bob doesn't take it, and he says, it's a good thing you didn't take it, because I would have killed you. And it's so good. Like he goes from being someone who you don't really think much of, or you think is kind of almost incapable because of his carpentry thing, to being just the scariest person in the movie, almost. Yeah,
they have but like at the same time, you're terrified of him, but you're also, like, I feel like I could understand where he's coming from. He's one of those villains that I didn't necessarily think was pure evil. Like, there was definitely motivation around why he was doing the things he was doing. So like, yes, he is a force against Clint Eastwood's character, but at the same time, it's very ambiguous of like who's good and who's not. And it's I don't know, like I verbally said, like, out loud at the end of the movie, when I saw like Clint Eastwood with his, shotgun outside of the saloon, I was like, dude, that guy is just the Grim Reaper. Like, I'm sitting alone in my house watching this movie. And I'm like, he's the Grim Reaper, people. Watch out,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I love the way that they sort of expose these legends. Like, I don't know what the right word is, but it's almost like they have something that the young people in the movie do not,
Mm.
and it's not a good thing to bear, but they
Yeah.
bear it anyways, and it's like they're superhuman in some ways. With the scene with English Bob and what's his name, Little something,
Little Bill.
Little Bill in the prison cell is like, that feels like, King Kong versus Goliath, or Godzilla, King Kong versus Godzilla in that moment, and the writer's just standing there like, you have no idea because these guys are from a different time. The idea of the death of the West hasn't been explored too much in the films that we have watched, but I think that this is a very compelling exploration of that without being all political about the Industrial Revolution is here and all that stuff. Instead, it's more personal, where it's like these guys they can't fit into society no matter how hard they try, and yeah, I think that's it leaves so much room to be interpreted as you're looking at their attempts to fit in. They're like outcasts, but it's almost unavoidable that they will end up like chewing at each other and killing each other in the end,
Yeah.
So I just found that really interesting. Go ahead, Cameron.
Well, what I was gonna say too was that Little Bill has he's obviously the character who's in charge of the law. He has the responsibility of the law with him, and I think you're right that you don't actually get the sense that he's the bad guy or he's the villain. He's definitely the antagonist, but at the same time, there's enough ambiguity that there's totally room to interpret this movie as Little Bill is somewhat in the right, but at the same time he's so cruel and he's so devilish that you don't root for him and you don't want him to succeed, and I think part of that is like you said, that it's like the past, his past life, like leaking into his new position, and there's something that's like he's trying to run from the past that he can't escape, and once it catches up to him with English Bob or with Clint Eastwood's character, once it gets to him, there's no escape, and what he does, in response is turn into who he used to be.
Right. Yeah. He's almost excited and joyful, which is scary, right?
Yeah.
That his old life is coming back for him, and he enjoys it. Like he enjoys the violence and attention, and when he's rallying up all the boys to go hunt down these guys, like he's all positive. He's like, we're gonna go get them. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be like, and you can tell like he's slowly falling back into that. I really think the idea around like being an outcast and falling back into like your old ways is really one of the major ideas in this movie. Even the representation of alcohol in the film with Clint Eastwood's character is I think there's a lot of commentary that can be said about that as well. It just seems like one of those this movie is really exploring the ideas of like trying to reform but then continually falling back. And I've been thinking a lot about the title of it too, right? Unforgiven. I haven't quite decided like why it's called that, because I think it's almost like, I think it's like unreformed, or because they're apologetic, but it doesn't matter, like they're still evil, all of them, and even though you root for some of them in different ways.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I think I would say Unforgiven, in some ways is a reflection of how they can't fit in, how they can't fit into this new age, and whether or not they were legends. Excuse me, I'm gonna sneeze.
No, it's all good. I've had like phlegm stuck in my throat this whole episode. I'm like, what is happening?
No, I think in some ways it's a reflection of the fact that they can't fit in, they can't evolve to this new society. And even though, you know, the younger characters like the writer and like the kid, who I think we should talk about too, they see them as sort of like legendary figures. I think they don't consider themselves, or at least William Money, Clint Eastwood's character, doesn't consider himself to be that legend. He considers himself to be a monster who he's trying to repent from, and that's why I think it's Unforgiven, because he's, you know, I guess it's in the title of the movie, but he's never forgiven for what he's done. You know, even in the final sequence, you know, where he's talking about where little Bill is talking about him killing women and children. You know, it's like that's something that has followed him forever. You know, followed him for the rest of his life. And even, well, never mind. That's a spoiler. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right that there's what did you say? What did you call it?
Like there's a man,
like unrepentant or
It was a different R word. I'm trying to remember what it is.
It's all right.
Yeah.
But I think, I mean, I think there's a, you get a sense that the crimes of the past that some people look at as legendaries are actually just haunting them, more than anything. So, I mean, do we want to talk a little bit about? I think we could talk a lot about the interpretation of the movie and about sort of the way that the movie holds itself up in terms of its own characters. I think we should talk a little bit about contextually what you think of the movie now that you've seen a lot of Western, or, you know, a handful of Westerns. You kind of have a feel for the genre, the trajectory of the genre. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about sort of where this movie fits in the place of the Western genre?
Well, a majority of my experience with Westerns before going through a lot of these different films, I'm just gonna name three things. It's Back to the Future 3. That's probably like one of my earliest examples of something Western that I enjoyed. And then Tombstone I really enjoyed. And then Red Dead Redemption 2 has been honestly the video game that I'm like, I need to watch more Westerns, because Rockstar takes heavy influence from films. And
I think they take heavy inspiration from this film too, actually.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. This movie treads some ground that is explored in that 80-hour video game, and they take two different approaches. I would say that Rockstar's representation of the death of the West is actually more positive and honestly like family oriented. Like it feels very like and that, no, don't take that particular way, but it feels like the death.
I see what you mean, but
yeah.
It's just a funny way to put it.
Right. It's like the death of a group of companions, right? Like that's their approach in talking about it. Whereas there are no friends in this movie. It's extremely individual. I mean, even the partnership between Morgan Freeman's character and Clint Eastwood's character is old. You know, they trust each other, but that it like, and they care for each other in some regard, but it doesn't feel like it feels like they just have a past, and it's not as like focused on that. It's more focused on their individual responses to the situations that they're presented with. Now their friendship does come into play, but it's Rockstar's approach with the death of the West is really focused on sort of a psychological approach and response to the rest of the world moving on from the West, right? And I think this movie inspired a ton of that, even as far as Clint Eastwood's outfit compared to like Arthur Morgan's attire. They wear like the same hat. He wears like a red like button-down shirt that is similar to something that Arthur wears in sections in Louisiana, where he's like wearing like the straps and like the rolled up red sleeves and all that. So I have a reverence for sort of that exploration of the Death of the West because of how much I enjoyed that game. And
Well,
it was
and also there a side mission where you talk to a writer,
yeah.
who about sort of like the legends of the West. Like, I think that's directly taken from this movie, obviously.
Oh jeez. I almost like spoiled a section of it, but that's like such a great mission. Like
Yeah,
cuz
yeah.
aren't you telling the stories about it and then that's towards the end of the game? And even the idea of like sickness, like mortality catching up with the legends, right? That sort of like plays a huge part in Rockstar's interpretation of like how these guys dealt with a revelation in their final moments, right? So I think I don't know. I heard someone talk about Red Dead as if it was like one of those famous like a huge book that literature looks up to. Like they're like, oh, this is going to be like the Odyssey of the video game genre because video games are a fairly new medium, right? And I think that this movie has a lot to do with the amount of detail and emotion that game evokes at all. I think it's more developed because it's 80 hours long, but this movie does an incredible job in 2 hours, posing a lot of questions without answers. And I think maybe the reason that Rockstar's story about the Death of the West is more positive is because there are some answers in it. And this movie just poses a lot of questions. It feels like they fleshed that out. So I wanted to shout out that game because I always talk about it all the time. And it was really cool to see a lot of its influence throughout the Western movies we've explored. But this one is like by far like one of the most influential for that game. I'm almost positive for it. Yeah, so in terms of the film being a more modern Western and comparing it to the other ones we've watched, I actually found this movie to be a lot slower than the last few. And there was something about The Searchers and The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, and even Red River that had a speed and urgency to them. This movie takes its time with slow scores and wide open fields and beautiful vistas. But I found it to be it felt longer than The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. And that movie is an hour longer than this, right? So I was sort of perplexed by that experience in watching it. And I think what's strange to me is that I was like, this just feels more like a modern movie. And it doesn't feel like a ton of risks are being taken and with its kind of with its style. Its style was very like secondhand to the writing of the movie, right? The writing and the exploration of the characters is what really shined through. And I think I'm actually more positive sleeping on it because I watched it last night than I was after I finished it because I think the plot and the characters, you need time to chew on them. You need time to like really decide how you're interpreting it. So I feel like a little green to the conversation for sure. But I overall like I'm positive on it, and it's neat to see a Western with a more modern lens, even if it is depressing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was gonna say, I think that's a feature of kind of Clint Eastwood's directing in a lot of ways. In some ways, I guess it's like not getting in the way of the story, not getting in the way of the what's happening. Now, to be clear, it is gorgeous. I mean, it's a beautiful movie.
Yeah.
There's I think of that shot right after what goes down at the outhouse, and there the kid is sitting under the tree, and he's like standing off from them, and there's the mountains in the background. Like, it's just a beautiful sequence, and that I think that all of that scene is really incredible. But I would say it is understated in terms of, I mean, I think everything is probably understated compared to like Leone's movies, because he just has a very distinct and unique style. I actually think it's a little bit more like a John Ford movie than a Leone movie.
Mm, yeah.
In the way that it's, you know, the the Searchers is also a gorgeous movie and has a lot of really interesting directorial elements to it, but it's not necessarily stylish, quote unquote. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't have the same sort of like Leone is the one who brought the style, and I think it's probably a good decision that this movie isn't like that. And I will say, even in modern movies, I think of the only person who's kind of able to capture the same stylistic flair that Leone is Tarantino, and you see that with Django Unchained, especially,
Yeah.
and you see that a little bit with Hateful Eight, but I think less so than Django. Yeah, I mean, I think Django is his take on a spaghetti western, Tarantino's. So I think there are modern examples of that sort of hyper stylized, very quick, very fast paced, very interested in sort of the I guess very interested in these sort of this portraying the world in a very specific way. And this movie, you're right, it's not that way, but that's not a knock on the movie either. I think it's probably a lot better that he didn't like make this movie super stylized, even in sort of where the movie goes in the end. I think it makes it much more scary, actually.
Yeah.
And much more devastating when you just get that shot of the three of them on top of the rock. And you have the sense that, like, oh geez, like there's something really wrong here. There's something really that's gone awry. So I think the understated directing style, first of all, is part of Clint Eastwood. I think that's just his own way of directing, but it's also it also makes sense for this movie, I would say.
I agree with you. I think it's justified because of the tone of the film, but it still made me miss a little bit of the style. Like I think
For sure.
it would be neat to see like Edgar Wright tackle a western or something like that, where there's just the quick snappiness. And I was pleasantly surprised by The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly because it had some of that stuff. So I agree with you about Django actually a lot. Now that you put it in that light, what you mentioned John Ford's films, and one of the things that I found different in The Good, the Bad, the Ugly is how Clint Eastwood's character, like sort of like the cowboy persona that he held, was actually very different than John Wayne's. And for some reason in my mind, I was like, cowboy is cowboy, period. Like there's just the rough, tough cowboy, and that's it. And I've learned that like the Western genre has a lot of different characters beyond that, whether it's like the business scammer or the doctor, or like just the young guy that can barely shoot, or the young guy that can shoot, the up and comer sort of thing. Like there's a lot of different staples to like the Western cast. But I thought a leading role was just John Wayne, Clint Eastwood. They're the same. What I found interesting about this film, and I think your comparison to a Ford film is right, is that Clint Eastwood acts more like John Wayne in this movie than he acts like Clint Eastwood, if that sort of makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
With his like old man, tired, grumpy sort of energy that he has in like Red River and The Searchers in some ways. So yeah, I think the comparison to a Ford film is very apt.
But much darker. I mean, much more melancholy.
Oh yeah. No, for
I
sure.
think I think this movie is like devastating in the way that it just leaves you like it leaves you kind of um almost like wrung hollow, you know? Like
Yeah,
all of your hopes and dreams about what this movie might turn into, it did, but it doesn't make you feel good,
a hundred
you know?
percent, 100%. Yeah, it's super depressing with where it
Um,
goes.
yeah, which again I think is another Clint Eastwood ism. Have you seen Million Dollar Baby?
I have not. I watched Gran Torino and I thought it was pretty silly. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, no spoilers for that movie either, but yeah, Million Dollar Baby is one of the most just like depressing movies I've ever watched,
Oh
and
man.
that takes something because I don't really care about depressing movies usually, but that one that one's pretty brutal, but
Oh, I know what the
uh
movie's about. I was trying to think. I was like, is that like American Beauty or something? And then I remembered it's the boxing one, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah, but I mean I think, well, I will say we're definitely going to explore more of Eastwood's movies because I think he's another one of these underrated, especially in Hollywood directors, um, someone who has kind of a clear vision and a clear take on what makes a good movie, and he has a sense, and I think a lot of his movies, um, he can be a little bit hit or miss with some of his movies, but I think you know this is one where he like gets right at the heart of things.
Yeah.
In the same way that I really love Mystic River, which he did kind of around this time actually, and at the same that's kind of similar where it's like yeah he gets to the heart of it. So I think maybe we'll do a Clint Eastwood month at some point. I know Juzo would love that because he's seen every Clint Eastwood movie, which is a lot. So, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I do want to give this a rating. I don't know. What do you think? And then maybe we can go a little bit into spoilers because I think it's important to talk. I mean, I don't know. Unless we don't have to, we kind of made enough innuendo, I guess.
I think if this film is taken at face value, it is you're missing something, right? It's meant to be chewed on. I don't know, like I just yeah, I don't know like if I I don't know if I want to recommend it for everyone, even though I believe that most people can get through this film. I feel like you need to want to chew on it. Do you know what I mean?
I agree. I totally agree.
And if you just watch it like for what it is, you're going to walk out with no thoughts and just be like, okay, like it really is meant to like sit and ponder the death of the West and people who are outcast from society. And it's beyond the scope of a cowboy rootin' tootin' shooting like movie, right? It's supposed to be something that is in the setting of the West, but can be applied to situations outside. I mean, I was thinking a lot about like war vets during this movie. I don't know why, but I was like, for some reason, like I can see a comparison, or even like trauma, or trauma from something that someone has committed, or being a criminal and things like that. Like this movie has a much larger message that deserves to be chewed on, otherwise don't watch it, like that. Honestly, that's how I feel about it. So I think it's very approachable, and it's something that you could write a really good paper on. I'm gonna say it's for the casuals. That's like kind of our step up from for everyone. It's like, I think casual movie watchers who are ready to kind of dig their teeth in, but not necessarily be like afraid of maybe too much artistic stuff in it, like, because it's not super. The movie is open-ended enough so you can take it somewhere. So take it somewhere. Do you know what I mean? Like in your
Yeah.
mind, like break it down a little bit. That's kind of
No,
how I feel
yeah.
about it.
No, I do know what you mean. I mean, I almost want to put it a little bit higher, maybe for the curious, just because I mean, the thing is, like, I think, like you said, everybody can kind of pull something out of it. I don't think anybody's gonna walk away being like, oh, that was bad, like bad. You know what I mean? Like, I don't.
Yeah.
I think most people can kind of get something out of it. And I think actually my first time watching it, um, I kind of you know, I don't know if I necessarily gave it the benefit of the doubt. Even I guess maybe I had that same sort of feeling of like, okay, you know, that was good, but you know, but I didn't really chew on it as much as I should have and should have given it credit for. So I do think it's for someone who's maybe at or someone who is at a higher level can really get something deeper out of it and really enjoy the experience more. Um, I think just because there's so much to this movie. I mean, it's so packed with meaning and with emotion and with sadness and loss and really just um, it leaves you reflecting on you know how we treat people, how we treat our sort of heroes, how we treat these legends, and what we're actually endorsing in a lot of ways. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's I think it might be for either the casuals or the curious, someone who wants to dive into um, something deeper.
Yeah. No, I think it's well put. Shot of the film camera, we talked about the end scene with the young guy sitting underneath the tree and Clint Eastwood standing up looking out over the town. That's a pretty good shot. Do you have any other ones you want to shout out?
Yeah, I mean, I love the one where he comes outside the bar at the end, and you know he's in the rain and he's draped in sort of light, and there's the flag behind him, and it's just like scary, you know.
Yeah.
I love that end sig, and also there's one shot that actually is really reminiscent of Dirty Harry, which again, you know, kind of gives me a reminder that this is a reflection on Clint Eastwood's career as well. But it's, you know, in the final bar, and he's standing over little Bill, and you know there's kind of that reverse shot that's very very much like Dirty Harry.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah, I think a lot of the cinematography and the vistas are beautiful in this movie. I love snow in westerns. I think it's a great setting to like have a moment in, I think.
yeah,
And so they use the snow scene very, very wisely, I think. And yeah, the sequence with the where there's a lot of great stuff in there. I honestly can't pick one, but the snow and then the rock shooting scene, where they're like shooting down at the guy with the horse. There's some
yeah.
really interesting cinematography in there as well. So, yeah, there's no shortage of greatness when it comes to camera work in this movie. I think honestly, I don't have much more else to say on this movie. I think we covered it the best we could. We could go deep dive with maybe more of a thesis around the film, but like I think we did a good job covering it. Is there anything in spoilers that you want to discuss directly?
No, you know, I guess I think we kind of were good enough about talking about what we actually meant that didn't necessarily. I think it's we're a little spoilery in the episode, but I think that's okay, and I think anybody who's seen it can, you know, understand what we're talking about. Anybody who hasn't, first of all, they should watch it, but I don't think they'll be ruined if they go through and continue watching it. I mean, you know, I think probably there's almost an inevitability to the end.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I find most interesting about the trajectory of Clint Eastwood's character is there's this sense that he is what he is.
Yeah.
And he's going to be what he is. by the end of this film, and I think that's really interesting and unique. Um, it's almost I've never seen a movie that does it so clearly and so convincingly. Turn your sort of almost bumbling. I guess in some ways it's very similar to Breaking Bad, actually. Kind of funnily enough, not all that similar because Walter White doesn't start as someone and then slowly move away from it, but it has the same pathway of him coming from sort of being this bumbling, doesn't know what he's doing, to being the scariest man in the room, basically. So yeah, so I don't know. I think it's really well done. You can see the inspiration that this movie has had. I do want to talk a little bit about where the Western has come, and where it will be going, I guess, in the future. I think there's been a lot of talk since the 80s about whether or not the Western genre is dead, partly because of sci-fi movies, because they've done historically a lot better than the Western.
But what
genre.
happens if you put them together with Cowboys and Aliens? Then it just blows out the box office.
Sci-fi Western. That's what it. No, I mean, but honestly, there's room. Obviously, there's room for that kind of crossover. Like I think Firefly is a sci-fi Western, and that was really popular.
Mandalorian.
Sort of popular, I guess.
I'd say the Mandalorian too.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, but that's the thing is, I think the whether or not the Western is dead, I think you can see the inspiration of the Western genre in all tendrils of cinema right now, especially action cinema. And I think, my favorite example of a modern, actually like true neo-Western is, well, maybe not my favorite example, but one of the greatest in the last sort of 10 years is a movie called Hell or High Water. That's that's like a straight up Western, but set in modern day, set in the housing crash of 2008 in Texas. It's like it's a really, really awesome movie, and one that has all of the great things about that we love about Westerns, but wrapped up in sort of a neat little package. I think you can point to examples of other sort of neo-Westerns like No Country for Old Men, and I think, I don't know. I think, unfortunately, Tarantino says he's only going to make one more movie, so he's not the one to do it. But he really was at one point the only person in sort of the 2010s who is keeping the Western genre relevant and alive. And I think actually you saw a sort of a revival in the 2010s of the Western genre with True Grit, then Django, then 3:10 to Yuma. Or that was a little earlier, but Hateful Eight, obviously, and so there was a little bit of a Western revival, and in sort of the classic Western way, but I don't think it's a genre that's ever really going to die, because I think it still has. I don't know if it's been exhausted necessarily, but I think people still get something out of it, or get a feeling when they go back and watch these movies. So I'm not necessarily convinced that the Western is quote unquote dead. I think we've seen it rise and fall so many times, so many different periods of the Western, and I'm not necessarily convinced that it's gone forever. So,
well, do we have another Western? Do we have another Monday in this month, or
nope?
This is it. This is the end of Western month.
Yeah,
Cameron, thank you for picking some great films for us to go through. I've really enjoyed it. It has not disappointed me at all, honestly. Where are we going moving into August?
Well, I haven't really decided yet, but I'll let you know.
Okay. All right. We might
I,
be one-offs, or it might be another theme. Who knows?
yeah. I know we sort of briefly mentioned maybe doing something fun for the Patreon. I don't want to say too much about it until unless we actually do it. But I think it would be a good idea personally. I don't know about you, Isaac. I kind of pitched you on it, but I think it would be a fun thing for the patrons because I'll just say there's a lot more in the Western genre that I'd like to explore. And of course, in the future, we'll do a part 2, but because there's things that we missed, of course. But
Yeah.
I think so far we got a really good capture of just a little hit of what the Western has become and sort of where it's gone, the parts that it's the evolutions that it's gone under. I think you got a fairly good education in the Western genre. So
I agree. Well, thank you, Cameron, again for preparing the show, and Patrons, thanks for voting on this one. We'll let you know what you're getting this month. I'm sure it's going to be something special. We post every Monday. Thanks for listening to the end of the show, guys. Again, you can support us patreon.com/ECFS Productions if you want any of the exclusive benefits. But we appreciate you no matter what happens. So we'll see you next Monday. Cinema Spectator is an ECFS Productions podcast executive produced by Darren O'Neill. If you want your name read in the credits of the show, you can check us out at patreon.com/ECFS Productions to achieve this status. Thank you, Darren, for the support, and for the rest of you, we appreciate your support as well. Have a good one.